Alex, I'd like to come to you now, because I mean, you've been a very strong advocate about this. You know, you're talking about the pandemic and the new paradigm. You've written books about this and the shorter working week, improving productivity and profitability and the combination between both. But really, really interesting to sort of hear your views about, as we move into, I suppose, what I now call the sort of the new normal, the normal 2.0. Where do you see this? Where do you see this conversation going? And do you think that the global pandemic has forced the conversation? And do we have the opportunity now to actually, let's be honest, actually, you know, recreate the way that actually we've just done business on a day-to-day basis? So really keen to hear your views.
Well, thanks very much. Very briefly, I think that the answer is yes, that there is, you know, one of the things that the pandemic has done is that, you know, on one hand, it has created a necessity to adapt how we work very rapidly under very trying circumstances. But I think it's also revealed, often in companies that thought that this was never possible, that they could make rapid and profound changes in how they operate, how their people work. And I think this opens, you know, the question of, when we go back to something like normal, what does that have to look like? And it doesn't have to look like sort of just, you know, a replay of the past. I actually had some slides, but given the way that the conversation has gone, I'm going to go in a slightly different direction and sort of do some remarks that speak more directly to the things that people are interested in. And I want to start by picking up on a remark of Jan's about John Maynard Keynes and also Bertrand Russell's essays from about 90 years ago, predicting that we'd be working 15 to 20 hours a week. And, you know, usually when people talk about that, the next sentence is what went wrong, or, you know, weren't they stupid for thinking of this? But actually, when you dive into Russell's essay in praise of idleness, there's a line at the end that jumps out at me, which goes, modern methods of production have given us the possibility of ease and security for all, but we have chosen instead to have overwork for some and starvation for the others. And this seems to me a really good description of the world of work as it exists today, you know, with its class of professionals and knowledge workers whose passion and high salaries drive them to overwork, and a growing class of precariously employed workers, many of whom we now, you know, or have decided to rename essential workers. But Russell was actually, Russell actually was right on both counts, in that, you know, information technologies and mobile devices, and most recently robotics and artificial intelligence, have dramatically increased our productivity and given us the possibility of that ease and security for all. But a combination of, you know, toxic culture and outmoded thinking and poor management and bad economic incentives have buried these gains under a world that creates overwork for some and starvation for the rest. So in other words, the 4-day week is actually already here. It's just kind of covered up. And what I talk about in my new book, Shorter, is how companies all over the world in often fast-moving and highly competitive industries like software and design and e-commerce and financial services figure out how to strip away those layers of sort of unproductive practice and thinking without cutting salaries, without sacrificing productivity or profitability, or alienating customers and clients. And the way that they go about doing a lot of this is actually sort of fairly straightforward. But they make this jump because, you know, it's because usually they're trying to solve very immediate business problems. You know, you might think of sort of the pandemic and this crisis as a time when you wouldn't want to try something new. But most companies that move to 4-day weeks are exactly in the position of having to respond to some really big challenge. You know, they have to recruit or retain great people, or they're having huge retention problems, which is an industry-wide issue in software and restaurants. They also have leaders who are often themselves struggling with work-life balance. Lots of the founders of companies that move to 4-day weeks come out of places, consulting companies or tech companies, and are, parents of young children, and they want to have the space to think creatively and be more innovative. And they also finally want to build sustainable companies that don't burn themselves and their employees out, but are built in ways that help them do work that they really enjoy. So how do you do that? Well, it turns out studies of office life conclude that most of us lose about 2 hours a day of productive time to pointless meetings and distractions and multitasking. So if you can just clear away that, you're a long way to being able to fit 5 days work in 4. And companies therefore start by shortening meetings, reducing the number of meetings that they hold. They encourage better use of existing technologies. They encourage people to experiment with new tools that help them be more productive. And they also redesign the workday. So setting aside periods when people can work in a very focused heads down way on their most important tasks, and then having other times for doing things like meeting clients or socializing. In other industries, it works a little bit differently, but it still works. So government agencies and factories and repair shops will often move to 6-hour shifts, but expand the number of hours that they're open. There are even now medical schools in the United States. Stanford started this last year, and University of Miami will start this fall, that have moved from 5-day teaching schedules to 4-day, where they're doing 2 days of coursework and lab study and projects, and then they have Wednesdays off, and then another 2 days organized around another problem. So there are a whole variety of different ways that companies and organizations are finding to reduce working hours without actually sacrificing productivity or learning or such. Now, and this is true even in hourly work, where what turns out to be the case in, let's say, nursing homes is that while you may have to pay more for a larger staff if you go from 8-hour shift to 6-hour shifts, places that do this end up actually making that money back because they don't have to spend as much on recruiter fees, they don't spend as much on temp agencies, and they also have far higher quality of service. So, it's not just about like everybody just working faster, but rather, figuring out how to work fewer hours while maintaining the same levels of profitability and productivity and quality and creativity. And what's striking, I find, is that all over the world, there are companies that report really dramatic increases in their profitability, in their productivity levels, and also, as Jan suggested, increases in health and happiness. People have more time for exercise, they have more time for hobbies, for spending time with families and children. And it also benefits companies, right? Almost all of them report higher revenues and profits. Companies fighting for talent can get more senior people who've done their share of late nights and want to keep doing great work, but in a much saner kind of an environment. And retention rates go way up. Another important thing is that it kind of encourages people to be more experimental and to have more of a kind of growth mindset. And I think this is going to be important for companies in the future as they deal with the next wave of the pandemic, or other kinds of other kinds of crises, because when you have a workforce that's accustomed to taking on really interesting, significant challenges in rethinking how they ought to work, in how they deliver services, doing this under the conditions of a lockdown can be sort of less stressful and sort of less alien for them than for other companies. The other thing that I would highlight is that the shorter work week can change the way that companies hire and who they look for. As one founder put it, anyone can sit in a chair for 12 hours a day, right? But companies that are working 4-day weeks tend to want employees who are experienced enough to successfully redesign their work. They need people who have strong organizational skills, people who can both collaborate and ruthlessly prioritize. And what they tell me is that the people who have these qualities are often like working mothers who around the world still have to fight to maintain the same responsibilities that they have before becoming parents. What's often the case is that labor markets value being able to stay late and not have a life. But when you reduce working hours for everyone, being a parent goes from being something that you have to take a penalty for to something for which you can demand a premium. And then I think finally, a more widespread adoption of the 4-day week can benefit countries as well. One of the things that I was struck with in the first couple months of the pandemic was that some of the places that went into sort of a response and have come out of it more quickly have been countries that are kind of hotspots for experimentation with 4-day weeks. So Denmark, for example, South Korea. And these are places that have high levels of social capital, that have high degrees of trust between, higher than average levels of trust between employers and employees, or between people and government. And I think that it is no surprise that those things turned out to be sort of connected. And so the last thing that I would say is that I think we're at a moment where it's clear that we're both going to be able, we've seen that we don't have to work the way that that we've become accustomed to. And indeed, that we have an opportunity to create something better, to deal with the kinds of enduring problems in work-life balance, with overwork, with the kind of public health crisis of burnout, and that we can begin to address these issues and also create workplaces that are safer, that are more resilient, that are better able to deal with crises. And that the 4-day week can play an important role in making that happen. So thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. And just before I come to you, actually, I've made some notes there. Really, really interesting. Some of the comments you made. I actually think about the health and the well-being of individuals, especially when you actually think even simple little things. When we talk about the flexibility of work, how many times have we been in an office environment when someone's left at 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and a number of people shout out, "Part-timer"? No, we don't actually always think about the negative impact that actually has on that person's health and well-being, because some, not all, maybe being not too generalistic, but some actually then think about actually, what do they think of me that now I'm leaving the office because of that, and the negative connotations that I actually have. So I absolutely agree with you that this is a game changer, and we've shown that, we've seen the research, the productivity, the health and well-being and everything, and now's the time for change. So absolutely all your points resonate.
Sociologists talk about the flexibility stigma, which is basically exactly what you're talking about, combined with challenges to people's careers, slower promotion, etc. If you go to flexible work or work from home in places like law firms or consulting companies, where kind of performative overwork is really the thing. And I think one of the dramatic things that happens when you move to a 4-day week is that there is no stigma attached to working fewer hours, because first of all, everybody is doing it, obviously, but second, everybody has to work together in order to make it succeed, right? I can't go home on, your ability to go home Thursday afternoon depends on my ability to get my work done, which depends in turn on both of us kind of sharing a set of social norms and an attitude towards time and attention and focus that lets us get this stuff done. So, instead of flexible work kind of pitting employees against each other, I think one of the great things that the 4-day week does is foster and build collaboration among groups, among teams, and between, capital and labor.
Yeah, absolutely, totally agree. And I think it's that collaborative effort that creates the output, which is what we're talking about.
Right.
Thank you, Alex.